Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, delegates. How are you? Did you have as good a night as I did last night? You would have if you were able to join us in the Heroes Hall reception opening the convention last night. I want to say that Heroes Hall is a great tribute to our veterans across America, but also as a tribute to our union here in Orange County. It was the brainchild of Nick Berardino. Is Nick here today, by the way? He's not here. Whose steadfastness and stubbornness built that hall with union labor. To honor vets. So please join me in thanking Nick Berardino and Jennifer Boitine, who is the General Manager of OCEA, and Gloria Alvarado from the OCLF, the unions of Orange County. Thank them very much. Thank you. Next up, last season, the NFL players grabbed our attention when they began to take a knee during the national anthem. Their act of protest was meant to draw attention to the brutality blacks still face in America and its furtherance under this president. Players were attacked and even blacklisted for exercising their First Amendment right to protest. President Trump on September 17th, in the midst of the nuclear standoff with North Korea, and millions of Puerto Ricans who were suffering without water or power, he chose instead to bring his attention to several athletes who chose to take a knee during the national anthem. He questioned their patriotism and said they should be fired. We first met DeMaurice Smith, executive director of the NFLPA, when he came to Sacramento to fight to save workers' comp for his injured members. As team owners tried to strip the benefits from players and deny them coverage for their injuries. He reminded us that NFL players face many of the same issues that we do as workers. A fair contract, safe work, a safety net when you get injured by your job. DeMaurice Smith demonstrated his deep commitment to his members when he came here to Sacramento to knock on those legislators' doors, and we knocked with him. We're honored that he's joined us here today to tell us about the struggle of his members. He's been a leader of the NFLPA for nearly 10 years. He was Assistant Attorney General for nearly a decade. Before that, and formerly counsel to then Assistant AG Eric Holder. He's a trial lawyer by training. You can see it the way he leads this Players Association. Please give a warm welcome to D. Smith. Where are you? Where are you?
Turn up the lights in here, baby. You know what I need. Want you to see everything. Want you to see all of the lights. Fast cars, shooting stars. All of the lights, all of the lights. Until it's thing is exactly where we are. All of the lights.
Well, the first thing I have to say is that's clearly the young picture of D. Smith. It is an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, Art, for that wonderful introduction. Catherine from the Cal Fed, thank you for inviting me here. I know somewhere out here is my good friend, Angie Wee, and I want to say thank you for her. Where are you, Angie? There is no one who fought, gave me so much advice, and if I ever have to go to war with anybody on the planet, I want to go to war with Angie Weed right next to me. So thank you. I'm entertaining my 10th year in a job that I inherited from a man named Gene Upshaw a few years ago. And I never knew Gene, but I know that he was a warrior. But you know that when you reach those milestones like your 10th years, you start to sit back and try to think about exactly why you made a decision to either do something or not do something. For me, as I enter my 10th year, I started thinking about why on the planet do I decide to keep this job? Because anyone who works in the labor movement knows that there are less painful ways to make a living. And I have figured out every painful way over the last 10 years to do this job. So today, I want to talk a little bit about who we are as a union. I want to talk a little bit about why I've made the decision to stay in the labor movement. And I want to talk a little bit about what Catherine touched on, what patriotism, what citizenship, what America, and what freedom really means. Because I made the decision to stay in the labor movement because the labor movement represents the best of what America is. That's it. And I decided to be a part of a union because it's a union that knows the meaning of family, and it's a union that knows that our families is exactly what defines everything who we are, and more importantly, everything that we strive to be. When you're a member of a union, you've made the decision that it's not only just your immediate family that matters, but when you look out into this audience and you look out into this crowd, you realize that everyone, regardless of their race, regardless of their religion, regardless of their sex, regardless of how they got here, that while we do have our immediate family, everybody on this wonderful planet is our extended family. That's why I belong to a union. Because when unions understand and talk about families, we just don't care about the ones born with the silver spoons in their mouth. We don't just care about the families that we're able to inherit or give a team to. We don't care just about the family that we might have inherited and never had to work a really hard day in our lives. When you're a member of a union, you care about the extended family of every Americans who try to fight each and every day to live what? What do we call it? We don't call it just a dream. We call it what dream? It's the American dream. So how dare someone stand up and try to decide that there's a particular type of America that belongs only to a certain group of people? I'll tell you one thing, it's not my family. I'll tell you another thing, it's not my extended family. And I'll tell you one other thing, that when it comes down to the type of people who decide that they are going to fight to the death for our families, you don't have to look any further than the people in this room. It's labor. It's the teachers, it's the firefighters, it's the police officers, it's the members who've decided all over our country that they're just not going to sit back and be selfish and think about what's in it for me. What's important? How do we all win? How do we all win? So at a time when patriotism and citizenship gets thrown around like a litmus test, let me talk a little bit about our union and about America that I believe in. The fundamental fact is we decide as the NFL Players Union that we're going to look out for one another. That certainly our guys, and I love them to death, they're a lot bigger than me. A lot faster than me, a lot taller than me, a lot younger than me. Wow, tough room. Tough room. But we've decided as a union, and what makes us different from people who claim that they care about family, what sets us apart are two things and one lesson. The first thing is I've already touched on. One, we've made a decision that we are going to look out for one another. We're going to do what it takes not only to take care of the guy next to you in the locker room, but also we're going to make a decision that we're going to try to take care of his family and his children and his children's children. And we're going to take care and look out for his health care and her health care. And we're going to make a decision that we want to try to make sure that they have a balance of a life after football that's just as important and just as rewarding as the 3.5 years that most of our guys play in the National Football League. The second thing that sets us apart as our union is that we love one another. And I know that when you come and certainly when you meet football players out and you see them on Sundays, love isn't a word that gets thrown around a lot. I've got a son who's 18 years old. He's 19 years old right now. He's playing lacrosse for the University of Maryland, and I love Champ to death. But you know what? I know that when he's around his buddies, he doesn't talk a lot about the word love. They don't get sentimental. There's probably not a lot of hugs. But you know what? Teams love one another, because that's the only reason that you'd belong to a team. Because if you could go at it alone and win, you would. If you could go at it alone and be selfish, you would. But what teams have understood over a long period of time is that teams can accomplish things that individuals can't. And so the reason we stick together as teams is not because simply we want to win. I like to win. I don't apologize for liking to win. But we just stay together as members of teams because we honestly believe and we understand that we love one another and that we can accomplish things together as a team that we can never accomplish as an individual. So today, when we talk about unions being under attack, teams are under attack. Collective power is under attack. And the reason why families and people who love each other and teams who love each other are under attack is the people who want to control us don't want to engage a team, right? They don't want to engage a group of people who've come together because they've loved each other. They don't want to engage a group of people or a family who stay together because they're willing to fight and die for each other. They'd rather pick us apart, they'd rather indulge everything that's selfish, and they'd rather drive us apart. So let me talk a little bit about why it became so important for our union to decide that we were going to fight for the rights of our players to be Americans. I understand, and nobody understood, and nobody saw, and nobody felt the slur directed at our men more than me. On a day when I wake up every morning representing a group of people who get their fingers broken and their backs broken and their heads concussed, when they play short terms, when they go out and give everything for each other, not only for the game that they love, but because that's their job. When you make a decision that you're going to call their mothers a name that would start a fight in my neighborhood to the death, well, that's a day when you know that it's a proud day to be a member who represents the players of the National Football League. I dig it. I do. And while there are many people who like to claim the word patriotism and like to claim what makes America great, I know that true Americans, the people in this room, a lot of people who probably don't blow it up on Twitter every day, a lot of true Americans who are just out there, whether they're working on a road or building a building or working in a school or defending us abroad or standing on the wall to protect us each and every day, and they don't have the time at 4 in the morning to send out something that's offensive. The true Americans understand what it means to be an American. True Americans understand that protest is quintessentially American. mean, I have one of those jobs where every now and then an owner likes to throw something that I've said or tries to throw something I've said back in my face. Usually doesn't go too well. So let's just for a second try to talk about something that everybody will agree on. 1773, a group of people who called themselves the Sons of Liberty snuck on board a bunch of ships bearing the British flag, and they threw the cargo overboard into the Boston harbor as a protest. Those men were called tyrants by some, and by some people who called themselves loyalists in their own communities, they called them traitors. But a group of people, and I am not comparing ourselves to our forefathers, but the lesson is inescapable. Our country's founding is inextricably tied to an act of protest that ultimately, among other things, led to the American Revolution. And so it is with that sense of what America means and where America came from that I'm really comfortable in believing that protest is quintessentially American. And so as the British Navy was steaming and pushing its way towards America to put down the insurrection of a group of people who dared separate themselves from the most powerful country on earth. It was Thomas Jefferson who said, as he was starting to pen the words of the Declaration of Independence, we must recognize the opinions of mankind, where we choose to separate ourselves. And so at the very time that we were talking about declaring our independence, after an act of protest, we know that our founding fathers, who were far from perfect, nonetheless decided that freedom meant something, that the freedom of speech meant something, that the freedom of assembly meant something, that the ability of people to come together for a common cause meant something. So no, we're not going to apologize for something that's quintessentially American. And so throughout our history, what have we seen? We've seen a country where we have decided, from the words of the preamble, that we are going to do our best to do what? To build a more perfect union. It's a recognition that the union is far from perfect. But we all decided, and those forefathers decided, that we were going to work together to build a what? A more perfect union. And so as we come together, we the people, to build a more perfect union, it has always struck me that the first thing that they said, the first task that they gave each and every one of us for the rest of our generations, when we were trying to build that perfect union, what's the first two words? Establish what? Justice. So when our forefathers decided that the largest words on the preamble were going to be "we the people," in order to form a more perfect union, the first thing that they tasked us with was establish justice. So no, with all due respect, whether it's men and women who marched for our rights, whether it's people who sat at lunch counters, whether it's people who decided that they were going to fight the dogs in Selma, whether it's men and women who decided that they were going to risk their lives for voting rights, whether it's people like us who can reach back one generation and talk about a worker who lost his job because he was going to fight for a safer workplace or a better pension. No one in labor ever has to apologize for the fundamental right to protest. And so, thank you. And so last year, and I want to close on this, last year when we went through everything that was going on in this country and people wanted to talk about on television about how this issue was somehow tearing teams apart. I can tell you as a person who visits all 32 teams, and unfortunately I do it in 12 weeks. I was 6'2" when I took this job. I can tell you as a person who traveled to all 32 weeks while all of that was going on, that I've never been prouder of our men. Why? Why? It's true. Because when you see things that are happening on the outside, and I walk into a locker room or a team meeting room, and I'm trying to take the temperature of, okay, what's going on? You're going to have to ask the question at some point, everything okay? And I usually whisper it because, once again, let's go back to the fact that they're bigger, stronger, faster than me, and those days of being able to run out the door before one of them grabbed me are long gone. So it's with a little bit of trepidation that you started to ask the question, is everything okay? And here's what I heard from every team. D, we're good. And we're good because for a lot of us, for the first time in our lives, we're having conversations in our locker room about sexism, racism, wage disparity, police brutality. And I've got to sit next to a guy who might have grown up in inner city LA, who went to school in Alabama, who's playing football in Boston. And another guy has got to sit next to a guy who grew up in Midland, Texas, who went to school in Miami, who's playing in Cincinnati. And here's the kicker. We all come from different backgrounds. We have different experiences. We now know that guys grew up in this locker room who had fundamentally different realities than all of us. But there's one thing we can't do in a locker room. We can't unfriend anybody in a locker room. Feel me? We can't push that little button where we don't see his tweets anymore. We can't flick off the television and not look him in the eye like a man. Each and every day, we're going to get dressed and we're going to go out in a field, and I have to know that he's got my back and he knows that I have his back. And I also know that when we leave here, he's going to go home beat up, bruised, battered, and just like many of us in this room, somebody, our spouse, our significant other, that's the person who's going to put us back together so we can come back to work and do it the same thing. And so, no, D, we're good because we've been able to talk with each other and listen to each other. Okay, I was a little shocked. I'm not going to lie. So what I decided to do in a couple of team meetings is pull up a YouTube video, and I punched in community town hall. And I pushed the play button on any random town hall video, and what do you think our guys saw when they looked at a video of our town halls and what's occurring in our town halls across our country? What did they see? They saw screaming, they saw yelling, they saw fights, they saw chair throwing. Any of that going on in your locker rooms? And they looked at me like I was crazy. Well, of course not. Because in our locker rooms, you know how we treat each other? With respect, because we're a family. They treat each other like Americans. So no, we're never going to protest for anything where it starts off by saying, and every day I look at the preamble for one reason. Nobody should apologize for being we the people. Nobody should apologize for the mission to form a more perfect union. Nobody should apologize for doing their best to establish justice. And whether you are a person in uniform or whether you are a person who fights every day to provide for your family, each and every one of us have more in common than separates us. And we can disagree about the issues, and believe me, in a room of 53 football players, you've got about 97 opinions. I love them to death. But like I said, sometimes I think there's an easier way to make a living. But I also know that they believe that they're the people. And I believe that they know that they have an obligation not only to do their job, but to stand up for something that's bigger than their team, bigger than the National Football League. And there isn't a day where I'm not going to believe that America is bigger than all of that. So I'm not willing to cede the language of what makes America great to somebody else. What makes America great is our families. What makes America great is our belief that we can make an ideal a reality for each and every one of our children. And you know what? My hope is that everybody in this room, for the rest of your lives, and I know sure as hell for the rest of my life, I'm never going to apologize for making us believe that liberty and justice should be for all. Amen? Amen.